Okay, we're getting started here. I've got my headphones. Hi there.
Hi, how you doing?
ED and Peter. Welcome.
Yeah, figured it out.
Good. We're still figuring it out. I'm still figuring it out myself.
Yeah.
But it looks like I'm just going to do some housekeeping here and check on the other screen and see that the link is there properly and that folks can get on.
I saw there were a few people on the chat already.
I see. All right. So anybody who's watching, I posted a link on the event page. I'm going to post it one more time.
Yeah.
And I see that we have myself, Peter Weston, Greg Thomas, Meta Learners, and Wendy Ronitz Baker watching, and then a maybe from Roberta. And Jeremy had something come up and is unable to join us, so I'm going to be at the helm of the controls here. Okay, and so we have with us, is it ED? Are those initials?
Ed.
Oh, it's Ed?
The other initials, yeah. Ed. Yep. The
Okay,
initials
Ed.
spelled it.
Okay, and Ed, we've met via the forum.
On the forums, yes.
And have been having some really intensive conversations, which I've really been enjoying. And then Peter, we've talked a bit by email. And
yes, a bit.
And I think you tried to join last time,
right.
And maybe didn't have a camera. So
I didn't have a camera on my laptop.
Okay, and
can you hear me, Marco?
I can. Yes.
Okay, great.
And then Wendy.
Hello.
Hi. And somebody is in Australia, and it's 4:30 in the morning there. And I don't know if they're going to join or not. Dee. So, Dee, if you would like to join us on the call, there's a link on that same page where you posted your note. And if you click that link, it'll open up the Hangouts window, and you could join us.
Hi.
I don't know if they're going to join or not. Hey, hi, Dee.
Di, please. Diane.
Di. Okay. Link on the same page where you posted your note. All right. And if you click that link, I'm going to give it just another minute because I know that there's a couple of other people watching who have not yet joined in, and they may not. They may just want to watch. That's fine.
Di, please. Diane.
And I think in terms of the technology, it's helpful to wear headphones because otherwise you can get an echo effect where your microphone is picking up the audio. Joins in, and they may not. They may just want to watch. That's fine. And whoa. Okay. So I'm gonna mute everybody, and then we can take turns talking. So okay, and then Kim, welcome back. So if you have something to say, unmute yourself by clicking the little microphone icon on your screen, and that'll open up the audio stream for you. So, shall we get started? I want to go for, okay, we have one more meta learner. I want to try to keep us to about an hour. One, because in this part of the world, it's early in the day, and so people may have other things to do. I have to work and stuff like that. And two, I think it's easier for others to listen later if the conversation doesn't go too long. And three, because I think that we're going to have another Hangout on Thursday, so we'll have a little bit more time this week. And four, last reason is that I think that there's a certain kind of intensity that we may be bringing to this, or it's possible to bring to this, partly given what I'm realizing is a relatively short reading period, which is these next, these 9 weeks, these next 8 weeks now left, and so I think that part of what we're doing is playing with time a little bit, and we are, we have a schedule, and at the same time, we're opening into questions, or we're going into considerations that can in no way be contained within that schedule, and that's obvious, and I think that that's something that can be a liability, but it could also be something that we work with and kind of use tantrically, perhaps, to have a really intensive, deep engagement right up front, and then let that kind of blossom into a more fuller and relaxed and open conversation as time goes on. So that's sort of what I'm thinking, and so I think we can kind of get into this and maybe just go around, because there's some new faces. I don't want to take a lot of time on personal introductions. I would like to get to the text, which is extremely rich, and then take it from there. So let's see. I'm just going to go by the order I see here, and I'll start with Andrew. If you just want to unmute and say hi, where you are in the world, what brings you here, and keep it succinct. I don't hear you. I think you are. There. I don't hear you at all. Let's try somebody else and then come back to you and just see if that's a microphone issue. Di?
Hi, can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, 4:30 a.m. in Greater Adelaide, South Australia. I think I'll be very much a listener. I haven't read anything like this before. I've done minimal philosophy, but I teach it in a kind of retirement University of the Third Age context, and so this is looking for resources for that.
Okay.
Thanks. Good to
All right.
meet you all.
You as well. How about Ed?
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, great. My name's Ed Mahood. I'm an American living in Germany, right in the very geographical center, as a matter of fact. I've been dealing with Gebser since about 1989, when a friend of mine, after an event we were at, pulled the ever-present origin out of his trunk of his car that he drove around with and said, "You have to read this book." And I did, and I haven't put it down since. So that's how I got here.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Ed. Kim.
Hey, Margot, can you hear me?
I can.
All right, cool. Hey, yeah, so my name's Kim. I'm in Dallas, Texas, so that's Central Time Zone. I'm joining you guys on my lunch break at work. So really great to be here. And I was in the other one, the other talk the other day, but this is my first introduction to Gebser, and I'm just in the middle of chapter 2 or near the end, and the first chapter blew me away already. I love it, so I'm just excited to dive into this a little bit more and into the learning as well. So
Cool.
yeah.
How about Peter?
Can you hear me?
Can.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great. My name is Peter Weston. I live in Lowell, Massachusetts. I'm an adjunct professor in the mathematics department at UMass Lowell. I've had a strong interest in consciousness since I started reading Teilhard de Chardin way back in college. I took a few semesters at Saybrook in the Nature of Consciousness course. The Ever-Present Origin was a required book So I read it during that time. And like Ed, I don't think I've ever put it down since. And in spring of 2012, I taught a special topics course for honors students. There were 13 students in the class, and I used The Ever-Present Origin as one of the 3 books that we talked about. It was my first rodeo. The course wasn't that great, but a few of the kids really liked it. And what came out of that was a suggestion that we have a club to kind of keep going with this kind of stuff. And we wound up calling it the Noetic Science Club. And it really has had a hard time getting off the ground. But I've got a new president this year, and he's already taken some initiative this semester, and I'm hoping that we can do some more. I've got an outstanding invitation to speak to the honors group in general on Gebser. It's a matter of making that happen. I hope it might happen this semester. It would probably be an hour talk. So anyhow, and I've read through the book a couple times, and I think it's absolutely essential to get Gebser's thinking out into a younger crowd. I mean, that's my perspective. I teach the 20-somethings, the early 20-somethings, and I think if there's going to be any kind of change, it's going to have to start coming from them. So I find it really difficult to initiate the conversation, and what I'm hoping is to get some ideas from all of you people as to how to start talking about this to younger people and get them interested. That's it.
Okay. Thanks, Peter. Wendy.
Hi guys, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
My name is Wendy, and I first started the Ever-Present Origin about 7 or 8 years ago. I was a student at the Graduate Institute here in Connecticut, and it was part of my Conscious Evolution program. And I get somewhere in the first 100 pages or so, I always got stuck. So unlike the folks who have mentioned they picked up the book and haven't put it down, I picked up the book 4 times and put it down 4 times because I kept getting stuck. So I'm here hoping that doing it with a group and doing it with a longer conversation, we didn't have a long period of time to talk about it in my graduate course. And knock on wood, so far I'm on page like 86 or something right now, and I haven't gotten stuck yet, so I'm pretty encouraged.
Cool. So let's go. There's 2 more people on the call right now. Thank you, Wendy. And Andrew Venezia, do you want to try again? I think you have a microphone issue. So you. Okay, so he's gonna, I think, try to call back in. Let's go to Meta Learners, which I'm assuming is not your birth name. Hold on, I don't hear you either. Okay, you may have a microphone issue as well. So I'm going to go back to Andrew, who just joined us again.
Did it work?
It did work.
All right, hi.
Did you just log back?
Yeah, I just signed off and signed back in.
Okay, so Meta Learners, you may want to try the same thing.
Everything was working. You know, I can see my volume monitor on my side going up and down. Everything looked okay, so I'm just signing it out. Hi, everybody. My name's Andrew, and I live in Ghent, Belgium. So I'm an American originally, and I found Gebser through Wilbur. I did a master's degree in integral theory that ended a couple years ago, and read Ever-Present Origin for the first time, and I put it down, but I think I will keep returning to it for a long time. So, yeah, I'm excited to go through it with a lot of people.
Okay. Cool. I'm glad to see you.
Yeah. Yeah, good to see you too. I've never met Marco before, but we kind of we're in parallel realities.
Yeah, we've emailed on work stuff actually.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah.
We can
very different parallel realities too.
Indeed. So Meta learners, do you want to try again? I still don't hear you. Okay, well, why don't you try logging in, logging out again, logging back in. There's also a settings tab on the Google Hangouts kind of window here where you should be able to check your settings for voice. You may be picking up it may not be picking up the microphone that you're using or something like that. So it looks like a little gear icon. All right, so we had this reading schedule, this idea that we're going to read this book over the course of the winter, ending in March, and our assignment for last week was the first 2 chapters plus chapter 3 up to but not including the mental structure which he discusses. So chapter 1 was called Fundamental Considerations. Chapter 2 was the 3 European worlds, where he describes the unperspectival, the perspectival, and then the emergent aperspectival. And then chapter 3 is the 4 mutations, where he discusses the archaic, magic, mythic, and mental structures that he's uncovering, unpacking through this exploration of history. And there's a ton of material in there that we could discuss. This is my first time reading this book. I've had a secondhand knowledge of Gebser, and so I don't necessarily feel there are many things I feel that stood out for me and that I might propose to discuss. But I would like to invite those who have read the book and who've been living with it for some time, who I think would particularly include Ed and Peter, to offer what they think might be the most salient points, the most rich points that we might explore in the next 45 minutes here. And I'll just leave it open to either of you to make a suggestion there.
I can say a few words, I think.
Okay.
The thing that struck me about Gebser the first time I read him was his absolute, I'm going to say clarity, although that's the wrong word, because everybody that reads him goes, huh? What's he talking about? Because it is very dense. But when you take away a lot of the trappings and a lot of the detail, let's say, just got the German word in there, a lot of the details that he provides to provide support for what he's saying, it's very easy to lose sight of the fundamental structures themselves. And I think one of the most important things with Gebser, because he is a very language intense author, is to understand why he chose to call them structures and not stages, and what the role mutation plays and why he chose to use that word as opposed to any of the other words that might have been available for organizing these things. We moderns or postmoderns or whoever we are these days love to see things linearly. We really like to put things one after another, follow it from start to finish, and know that we've gotten somewhere. And Gebser points out that these structures are not linear. They're always there, but they're not always consciously there. We're not always aware of them. Sometimes they sneak out when we're not looking. Sometimes we encounter them when we're not expecting it at all. I was in a recent Facebook discussion recently about an American football game, and when I think about America and football, you have all of the marching bands and the drums and the colors and everybody yelling and screaming, and to me, this is where the magic appears. It's not necessarily efficient magic, as Gebser might say, but it's magic. That's that kind of consciousness. So we see it's with us all the time. Or we all have stories about where we came from as people. In the American elections, since that's taking up a lot of news space these days, everybody's calling for going back to let's make America great again. And so now they're bringing out all of these old stories about how things used to be. And that is a kind of mythology that they've come, because there's nothing to actually factually verify when you look at the history of the United States, the things that they're saying. But people believe the stories, and they want to believe the stories because they give them a sense of belonging. So there we've got very strong mythical elements that are running around with us. And of course, we've all been to school, and we've all been to college, and we all had to go through that graduate, some of us have at any rate, mill, where everything gets put back into that nice linear, sequential, logical, here's where we start, and here's the premise, and off we go. And so we have all of these things all of the time. I mean, we live them richly. And that's the thing that I liked about the first chapter, or actually the second chapter, where he talks about these three structures of consciousness that are always with us, whether we see them or recognize them or realize them or not, but they're with us every single moment of every single day, but we don't stop and reflect or perhaps recognize that they're there. So for me, structure and mutation are two key notions that I think are very helpful in understanding where Gebser's coming from and what he's trying to tell us.
Thanks. Would anybody like to respond to that?
I would.
Mm-hmm.
So what I thought was interesting, two things, is I agree with Ed and his Gebser and his use of structures as opposed to like a phase or progress, because just because the structure changes doesn't mean it's gotten better. And being a student of evolution, I tell people that all the time. Just because things change, and they will, doesn't mean it's going to change for the better. And I think it's interesting to point out, I think, you know, Gebser gives us the positive and the negative of how those structures are playing out in subsequent structures and in our present day experience on them. The other thing that I thought was interesting was mutations as the word to use. I know Ed used bifurcation. I use that word a lot as well. I also have a little bit of a history with quantum mechanics and neuroscience, so I tend to think of things as quantum leaps. So again, it's not a bad thing. It's not an evolution. It's not progress. It's just a leap and a change from the current environment that no longer serves us into something that's different. So sometimes when I read mutation, I think of negative, because you think in biology, you know, if it's a mutation, it's something bad that we try to, you know, fix. You know, medically, we try to fix mutations. You know, we don't like them. Whereas if it's just a leap, like a leap of faith, it's almost a little bit more positive. So I kind of use the word leap when I read mutation in Gebser.
Thank you, Wendy. You know, one thing that struck me is that he tries to distinguish mutation from three different potential misinterpretations. Like, one is the biological, and he goes through some pains to differentiate what he means by mutation from the biological. Two is the historical, which would be the idea of progress and the idea of these stages of evolution, which I think is maybe the more layman's way of kind of understanding Gebser that we may have gotten through some of the secondary sources. And then the third one is interesting because I didn't notice it at first, but he talks about mutation as being not volitional. In other words, it's not something that we do necessarily, right? It's not something that we will, that we can make happen. It seems to happen spontaneously. And it also, it made me think of this notion of conscious evolution, this idea that we can consciously evolve, that is, we can kind of effectuate, cause our own evolution, and to kind of put that in a new light, or to question that from the perspective of the kind of landscape that he's laying out in terms of mutations, which, you know, they kind of are happening at all different points, you know, different locations in geographically at different points in time. There doesn't seem to be a neat or very coherent way in which these new structures emerge. They kind of like bubble up, you know, through history, and then begin to coalesce into something more universal and formidable, is the understanding that I'm getting. And just one more thing to look back to Ed's point earlier, that of the structures being with us, I got the sense, I have a sense reading this of the power that the structures have. The fact, in other words, that they're not just these abstract kind of things that are behind us. We haven't transcended them. they actually have incredible power. And as somebody who was writing in the midst of two world wars, of fascism, of totalitarianism, of these incredibly violent upheavals in human civilization, I think that he felt that very palpably. That sensibility is like reflected in the text, I think. Anybody else would like to respond or take that somewhere?
I can say a little bit, Marco.
Who's this, Peter?
Yes.
Okay.
When I'm talking to students and the opportunity presents itself, I kind of kick into about a little 10-minute talk, and I talk about the dimensions, from archaic to magic to mythical to mental, and I give the exemplars. I'm not going to do the whole thing here because it'll take too long, but like when you get to the mythic, and the Egyptian art is flat, it's a two-dimensional. The students seem to really get that immediately as soon as you say that. And when I talk about the mental as opening up a third dimension, and talk about the axial age about 2,800 years ago in Greece, and I guess there's evidence that it happened in the East as well. I try to emphasize that I think what's happened over this period of time is that the mental has been so phenomenally successful for human beings, is that it's kind of made the two previous structures, magic and mythical, almost atrophied. And I don't think we realize it. I think Ed's point is that it's there all the time and we don't realize it. I liked his thing about the marching band and the colors. So that's what I think is, like, how do you, that's one of the two things that I'm interested in. How do we start talking about it so as to activate these structures, the magic and mythical structures that are supposedly in us, so that we can look at them and see efficient expressions? I'm not sure how to do that, and I'm kind of curious about that. The one thing, I have a strong interest in religion, and one of the things that kind of bothers me is that when the students and a whole lot of other people talk about religion, they put it down as a myth, and I think that's evident of the dominance of the mental structure, all right, and the devaluing of myth. And if there's any kind of a conversation, I usually come back with, well, don't you like Star Wars? I mean, and everybody loves Star Wars, and so, you know, that's a myth, and yet that's divorced from people's feeling about religion. Myth, when you especially talk about it with religion, is really a negative thing. In fact, I think myth in general has become synonymous with falsehood or untruth, even a lie. Really smart people write books like the 10 Myths of Economics or whatever. On the other end, I think the characteristic that Gebser is saying about mental consciousness is that it divides. Divide is the key characteristic. So when he talks about the polarity of the mythic consciousness, it's like the yin-yang symbol. There is opposites, but they're in balance. And what mental consciousness did was divide that, so that the polarity becomes duality. And now we have that to the extreme. Okay, there's right and wrong. Okay, if you listen to the political discourse today, if you can even call it that, I mean, it's not polarized. It's worse than that. Okay, it's been completely become completely dualistic, and I don't think anybody on either side would convince somebody on the other side using a mental rational consciousness that you know, we're going to use the word that Gebser used, supersede, or get to a supersession. Now, the other thing, the last thing I want to point to is that when I try to talk about the new consciousness, the integral aperspectival consciousness, Gebser says that it started about the French Revolution, and I have a hard time arguing that. I got to go back and study that. When I'm trying to speak spontaneously, I don't know how to do it, right? Except I will say that I went to a conference in consciousness at Yale last summer, and there was a young PhD from Harvard who's doing dissertation work, and I guess now he's graduated, but he's looking at when time things change, and he said there was an incredible influence to change to the metric system around the French Revolution, and I think that might be evidence. But then you go to, I quickly go to like 1859, and and I can't say his name right now, The Origin of the Species, and you know, the eruption of time into the consciousness of people. And I always tell the story about Bishop Ussher in Northern Ireland in the 1600s, who was supposed to be an expert in the Bible and conclusively studied that the earth was 6,006 years old. And so that eruption of time in saying, like, you know, if there's origin of the species, there's an enormous amount of time behind us. You know, what does that do to our consciousness? And then in 1905, with Einstein's paper, you know, we now have a space-time continuum, and this eruption of time into our consciousness. And I'll finish with the thing that intrigues me is that Gebser says that the evidence of this new mutation of consciousness is in the expressions, there's a concretion of time. I cannot tell you how much time I've spent trying to play with that in my mind, trying to understand what that means. And I can give the exemplar of Picasso, you know, having multiple perspectives in his paintings of women. All right, that works, because in his mind he would have to walk around the model, and that would take time. I see that as a concretion of time. But how do we do that today? I don't know. That's what I'm kind of dealing with. I do have one more point, if you don't mind me. I'm taking a lot of time here, I get it, but I'm trying to be a little bit of a motor mouth. But one of the things that Gebser says somewhere in the book is that he decided on 4 mutations, but that there could have been like a post-magic and a pre-mythical, and there could be some smaller divisions of these mutations. And another place he says, I think he wrote this just before he died, he said that he thinks that what has to happen is this new mutation has to happen within the next 2 generations, and if it doesn't, it'll take another 2,000 years. Well, I think the 2 generations are already up, and it's clearly not prevalent. So that makes me wonder if he thinks that he's thinking so far ahead, like to 2,000 years. None of us are going to see that. What do we do now? And then start thinking about what is this, some kind of smaller incremental jump rather than the whole, I don't know, the whole ball of wax. I don't know what else to say. All right, I guess I'm done.
Anybody like to pick that up?
I wouldn't mind saying a couple of words.
Okay.
I can sympathize greatly with Peter in trying to get people to see things, if that's even the right word, just to be aware of how differently the world was conceived at one time. One of the things that helped me very, very much in all of this, I don't know if any of you have ever seen it. It's a silly little movie called "The Gods Must Be Crazy." And it's a story of a Coke bottle that ends up with a pygmy tribe in the Kalahari Desert. It's the hardest thing they've ever seen. But what I find fascinating about the movie is how that lead character, when he decides it's evil, because now everybody wants it. It brings about strife and discord within the tribe. And so he says, all right, tomorrow I'm going to take the bottle and throw it off the end of the world. And they pack together a little lunch for him, and off he goes. And for me, this was one of those moments where you realize what spacelessness and timelessness mean. Because he didn't think twice about, well, how far is it? Or how long will it take? I'm just going to go do it. And so he does, because it's just a part of what's there. The rest of it comes out in the interaction with the modern civilization that are out there, the researcher, the teacher in the school, and then we see in these interactions how differently the world is perceived by these different structures. So that was one of the things that I found very helpful. I also find this perspectivity. I also did a reading group many years ago, and we were in San Francisco. I was living in California at the time, and we go up to the Legion of Honor and simply walk through the gallery and look at perspective. That's all we did. We spent the whole day, and when we came out, many people said, I've never seen that before. They had never realized it, and this is this bringing into awareness, this what Gebser in the English calls wearing, actually making present within us this experience of, it's a complete totality of experience of how these different structures work. And I think it's really, I'm with you, Peter, as well. The French Revolution just doesn't do it for me. There's too many other things that are attached to it. There's too much history that's hanging on it that obscures the idea of how we deal with time. And so I think the way into that is over the time aspect, however that may be. And I've also found things like a lot of the stuff that Nikola Tesla does. He speaks in these same kinds of terms. So if you have people that are more, let's say, scientifically, mechanically, engineeringly attuned to things, he might be a way to get to some of them. Also not very known. People that should be known aren't. Gebser is one of them as well. But coming to terms with this notion of time, or how time plays out in our life is I actually think the key to all of understanding what we're going through now, because I do believe we're closer than Gebser. Gebser had a couple of moments where he was very pessimistic about it all. And depending on how you count generations, if we take biblical generations, they're 40 years. Well, okay, we're getting close, but we're not quite over the edge yet. So we still have a chance. And I do see it coming. I see a lot of things where people, organizations rise in co-ops, for example. Most people don't know it, but in Germany there are 27 local currencies. People are not playing the same games that everyone else is playing in the world that we're confronted with. And I take all of these as indications that people are simply willing to view the world differently. And when they're willing to do that, and they're doing it together, there's a togetherness that's not a collectiveness. It's not that we're not in the masses, 1950s, the organization man. We're not in the masses of the 1800s and the revolutions. There's no collective in the sense that we're here for a specific purpose, because I could be involved in this currency thing. I might work for a co-op, but it could be that I work for a major corporation somewhere as well. And people do come to terms with these different modalities in their own lives as well. But I take all of them as examples of how we're deciding that, well, the way things are really don't work the way they should, because most of them are broken, and we're slowly coming to the realization that we can't fix them. That's not going to happen. So I just read a quote from Gebser today when I was just taking some notes, and he said, "Every reform is an attempt at resuscitation. It's a trying to bring something back to life that has died." And so people are just not reforming; they're doing differently. Others. It's an otherness, not a better, worse, just other and different. I think that's important.
Thank you. The passage that comes to mind talking about time is on page 22, and it's where Gebser says that as we approach the decline of the perspectival age, it is our anxiety about time that stands out as the dominant characteristic. And he goes on through that paragraph. It's an excellent paragraph. And I think that one of the characteristics of this mutation, of this particular moment where there's a proliferation of different experiments and different ways of structuring our lives, is that there are different ways of structuring time. Like, we don't want to live in the dominant paradigms of time that we've inherited. Like the stereotypical one would be the 9 to 5, go to work, for 40, 50 years for a company, and do your retirement and then die. That one, we've objectified that. And we're able to see that actually we can structure that differently. We could look at the facts, the facts of our mortality, of our temporicity. But as we, I think, gain, or as Gebser might.
Did you guys lose him?
Yeah, I thought that was me. Okay. Hi, everybody.
Yeah, I don't know what happened to Marco.
No, Marco.
Two Marcos.
There he is.
I'm back. I'm not sure where I left off. I'm sure I must have been saying something very profound that would have changed the course of history.
Right here.
He fell into the time.
I was talking about time.
Yes. Structuring time differently in our lives.
Exactly, and that's actually one of the attractors for me in this book is to, Peter, you brought this up, was the getting my mind around time and somehow getting some handle on it, because that time anxiety that Gebser talks about on page 22 is such a fact of life. Getting things done on time, having too much to do, not having enough time, all these things, and I witnessed this happening in myself, and I know that in those moments when I'm able to be relaxed vis-a-vis time, to abide in a sense of eternity, there's a greater intelligence that starts to become apparent and starts to operate through me, and I get ideas about what to do, and I get clarity about how to live. But it doesn't come when I'm in this segmented state with regard to time. And so there are some real, I think, existential implications to how we understand time. And the last thing I want to say before I let somebody else talk, and also notice that we've had a couple of other people join, is that Gebser says in a couple of places that we really have to grapple with our history. We really have to get into the meat of it. And part of the power of reading these first 2.5 chapters for me has been this sense of that's what we're actually doing in reading the text. That there's an actual engagement with the structures and the actualities that have given rise to who we are and how we are being in this present moment. So I'll leave it there. I just want to note that we've had a couple people join. One is Nicholas, and the other is Greg Thomas. And we had introduced ourselves earlier. So I want to give these two guys a chance to chime in as well if they'd like to.
Hi, I'll chime in. This is Nicholas here. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
I just heard about this event through a friend of mine. I've been active with an integral theory community in New York for some years. That's not always that active, but I guess I went to a Gebser conference maybe about a year ago. Marcello, I don't think I met you, but maybe Jeremy or somebody else connected with this call. Anyway, a friend of mine who's more involved than I connected me up with this call. I read through the Ever-Present Origin in its entirety some years ago. This is my office roommate and General Hanger-On, Clem. Anyway, glad to be here. I'll have some comments, I'm sure, down the line.
Okay, thanks. What's up, Greg? You there, Greg? Do you want to say hi? I can see you but can't hear you.
He has on the headphone.
Yeah, maybe his feed is frozen. All right, well we can come back to you. Any other responses? Kind of, we're building on themes of time. We're building on themes of how do we even begin to identify and communicate, teach perhaps these structures, these emergent structures. You know, and one thing that I think to keep in mind too is that all this material in these first parts of the book, in my understanding, are preparatory. Like what he really wants to get to is the integral, a perspectival structure. And so, but he can't get to that without first identifying and differentiating the other structures. So, and partly just as a matter of, you know, intellectual clarity, but partly also because the integral requires those structures, right? So like getting into the magic, getting into the mythic, identifying them. He has certain historical examples that he's looking at, but we've had now another, you know, 50, 60 years of experience to draw on. So, for example, one movie, Peter, that might work really well for your students is the movie Interstellar, which has everything to do with space and time and with this intuition of another dimension of time or of being or of experience. I don't know exactly how to talk about it. That would be an interesting one to look at, and you know, probably not for a full discussion right here and now. And I think that we could find a lot of other examples, like The Gods Must Be Crazy and others, where you could bring the ideas that Gebser is discussing in this book and illuminate them with those particular examples.
Hey, Marco.
Yeah.
This is Cam. Just real quick on the time piece, and then also I think Peter brought something up, and I shared a link around just perspective in general. I think you brought up Picasso as an example. The two things that come to mind for me where, for instance, the organization that I work for is a global organization, so I'm basically interacting with or on the phone with people or conferencing with people throughout the globe every day, and that's a perspective I realize that a lot of my friends don't have to deal with, meaning they're either in the U.S. or they're in Texas, et cetera, et cetera. So I find that has really helped me, and my specific focus in the organization I'm in is digital collaboration. So how do you use the internet as a way of managing asynchronous time, knowledge, human presence, and creating a more intentional presence for an individual working with a collective. And so we've had a lot of real challenges around time and asynchronicity and the fact that people are all over the globe. And also just with this idea of perspective and point of view of the individual and how we see and participate in the organization gets skewed by our functional purposes. But there's a lot of exploration happening now. And I work for a large German company, Ed, you'll understand, Siemens is who I work for. So we have a tremendous opportunity to, as an organization, to reinvent how it is that we think about who we are and what we are and how we're accomplishing goals, which is really exciting to be participating in that. But the focus of the organization I work for is this digital factory, so it's re-seeing the world through like a digital lens. And I find that to be an interesting perspective as well, just in terms of how we think about how we're interacting. But I see technologies coming up today like Snapchat, which give us a point of view or a collection of points of view, then we can then have like a big perspective on all these different points of view that are feeding into a political debate, etc. So I see a lot of mechanisms and technologies that exist around providing points of view or different ways of thinking about time or relating to each other. What I don't hear is a lot of coherence around what the significance of that is. And for me, it's like it really causes me to think about and see what's trying to emerge through these technologies and through these things. But I don't hear a lot of people talking about what the significance of that is. They're just being incorporated for marketing or for branding or for, you know, here's another cool thing that we're doing. But I think if you sit down and were to talk to the CEO of Snapchat, like you've seen Colbert and some of these guys do, I think they would be potentially functioning from a higher stage of development. And that's, I guess, what I'm kind of curious in finding out is some of these people that are providing these technologies, where they're operating at, and if there's a coherence happening at that level. Because I just see a lot of little indications around where this could be emerging and maybe not being fully actualized, but potentially actualized if enough people understand the potential of the technologies.
What do you think? what are some first of the, like, intuitions of what they may be?
I think bringing voice to, points of view. So it's like we kind of went through this thing where it was like maybe, I love how they gave the example of the magic meets the rational, and there's this identity around a group to where it can't really stand next to the ego or in competition to the ego. So they, the South Americans basically kind of collapse when faced with the Spaniards, right? So they talk about this sort of magical thinking with this rational thinking meeting that. But it's like if I take that kind of like structure of identity and then you bring that individual focus all the way to its extreme where everyone is vocalizing their point of view, and then all of a sudden we're kind of getting into this relativism where it's like your point of view, my point of view, their point of view, and then you're seeing this played out like in a political debate, right, where everyone's like sharing their point of view on the debate. The point of view becomes less interesting because it's a collection of individuals, and it's really more about the meaning that's being made and the reflection on what does that mean that there's all these points of view. And then there's, we kind of go back down into, well, who's more right? So we get sucked back down into the same plane, as opposed to elevating the consciousness around, like, well, what does it really mean to have it so apparent and so obvious that here's all these points of view? Or you can take a really, charged topic and talk about body cameras on police, right? And the whole Black Lives Matter movement, and you might see one point of view on something and it brings voice to it and tells a certain story, right? And then you get more points of view and you're like, wow, there's a real problem here. So I think as these points of view create a more accurate picture of what we're really dealing with every day in a lot of different areas, I think in some areas it's kind of stalled out and stagnated because it's really a trap of right and wrong, whereas in some areas it's bringing voice, bringing light, and bringing awareness into wrongs, injustice, etc. So I think as this continues to evolve and be present where everyone's looking at a cell phone, everyone's capturing things, that it just brings more light into what we're really dealing with today. And I think that kind of brings the presence of historical aspects of what we haven't faced into the present moment, because certain things keep repeating themselves. So again, I think technology is a part of it, but again, the conversation and the evolution of that and how we understand that and what we do with that, for me, is just really the question.
Well, the internet definitely has a way of collapsing space and time, right? I mean, here we are distributed across the world, and we're talking in real time. And the same thing, like with the body camera issue, like any event that happens anywhere in the world could be uploaded to YouTube within a matter of minutes and be available for everybody to see. And then, like, I think your last point is really, really pertinent. Like those events, as we talk about them, and we realize quickly that they're not isolated, that they're part of patterns, and that they have deep histories behind them, which, with a little digging, you can start to figure out that you can start to connect the dots, if you will, and see that it's not an isolated event. It's part of a structure. It's part of structural issues or patterns of behavior, patterns of power, what have you. And anybody else want to?
Yeah, I'd like to throw in the notion from Teilhard de Chardin of the noosphere. Someone, was it Greg, mentioned this? Ed, perhaps. Do you want to say something about that? Peter, okay. I have read Teilhard de Chardin, and that whole notion of the envelope mind around the globe that he came up with in the early 1900s. So, Peter, why don't you say more?
Yeah, Teilhard is my #1 author. I guess Gebser's #2, pretty close. It's Teilhard that brought me to the idea of consciousness. I was brought up in a fairly traditional, strict Catholic household, and as I came through my years, a lot of it didn't make sense. And kind of Teilhard's view of that consciousness is convergent and irreversible, I don't know, made a lot more sense to me. And after I immersed myself in Teilhard and his idea of this noosphere, when I would hear church readings and things like that, I would interpret them now in a whole different light, and they seem to make much more sense than they did when I was in my rebellious phase. I don't know. The noosphere, I don't know what else to say about that. But I do think it's really interesting. I'll say one thing quickly. One of the things that I like in part 2 of Gebser's book is he has a discussion of the word nous, which is where the noi comes from. And what I find interesting is that it's now translated as mind, but he says that it's a really ancient word, and it goes back and it has an affective connotation. And I think it's back to a time when people thought that the heart was the principal organ of knowing. And what I find interesting is a word like metanoia. Noia is the derivative from nous, and it means literally translated as higher mind. But when it's translated, it's usually translated as change of heart. And I think that notion still is with us, because we say when you really know something really well, you know it by heart. And usually when I make that line to my students, the eyes light up. They seem to like that. So I think this whole thing of nous, I like what Gebser adds to it, that it's not just mind, that it's a connotation of the affective. And it seems to me that that's what's necessary today. If you get into an argument like with all Black Lives Matter or all lives matter, one side's not going to convince the other side, right? And you're not going to change your perception unless there's some kind of change of heart. So I don't know. I guess that's what I'm interested in, this new integral consciousness that Gebser talks about. If we can realize it and effectuate it, there's a good word, effectuate it, there might be a real difference in the world, and that's what I'm groping for, and hoping to hear more about from you guys in this hangout. Okay.
Let me ask a more open question. Where do you feel with respect to that structure? By that I mean, do you feel that it's effective in you? Do you feel that you're living it in some way? Does it feel palpable? Does it feel real to you? Does it still feel like it's dispersed, scattered, not yet emergent? Does it feel like a level of some kind that you're at, or that you might see some people at, or some organizations or institutions at? Like, how do you relate to that? How do you actually see its reality, in your world?
You want me to talk to that, or somebody else?
Let's see if anybody who maybe hasn't said as much would like to chime in. Andrew?
I would love to say one thing which kind of relates to that, Marco, and Gebser is not talking about, in my opinion, he's pointing at something other than multi-perspectivalism, right? He's talking about aperspectivalism, aperspectivicality. I don't know if that's a word. I don't think it is. And if you look at what we're doing here, right, we're kind of sharing opinions. We're pointing at things from different places, which is also what Picasso is doing. But I get the sense that that's our mind. That's us trying to understand this emergent thing from different perspectives and in different ways. But that's not what Gebser's talking about. Gebser's talking about what is ever present. Gebser's talking about this massively creative source that everything is coming out of, that it can help you to have a change of heart when you get to the point where you see that these two perspectives are both real, but they don't add up. But it's the realness that's underneath that I think that Gebser is pointing to. Yeah, so I have this sense of as we're trained to, and I love that sense of a change of heart, Peter. I think that's a really great point. And as we're trained to look at things and understand them in this really time-bound and sort of purely perspectival way, we're like and the whole culture is as well. We're frantically trying to figure this out. We're frantically trying to figure this out. We're frantically trying to figure this out. And that energy in that, the chaos of that, is I think is like our way of is a result of us still approaching it from the outside, but it's not something that we're outside of looking at. It's something that's just here too. It's something that's just here that's doing everything, and that's so it's got such a different feel to me than that. Yeah.
I would echo what Andrew just said. That I don't know if is everyone on the call familiar with like Claire Graves as well, spiral dynamics, that whole stuff.
Yes.
So there's a lot of people in the world today who are reading this kind of thing and talking about how, well, we need this new yellow, and you know, and I believe I'm functioning at it, or I hope I am, or I'm going to talk if I think I am. But if we try to be, it's fairly obvious. We could probably agree that in the macro structures around us, that it's not yet really merged. Maybe emergent, maybe soon to be. Who knows? But you know, I would strongly echo what Andrew just said about the multi-perspectival or green in shorthand being here amongst us and all around us as well, and perhaps needed, but not yet the breakthrough to something that could be fairly called a perspectival or timeless, and you know, that breakthrough, which is a paradoxical word even to use about it if it's already here at some level, but if it's not here in a self-consciously aware of itself way, then it is a breakthrough when it comes about that we all earnestly and collectively try to tune into something that's directly I don't know that it's successfully expressed to Gebser, but that gets to our evaluation of the whole book. But something that truly steps outside the linearity of time, or even the multilinearity of time. I would agree with Andrew just that I would expect or hope for something with a completely different feeling tone, and I guess naively at least a certain calm, which, you know, sometimes we all have as well, or we wouldn't, you know, even be able to stick it out sometimes.
Just to respond to Andrew and what you're just saying too, as far as the multi-perspective, I don't want what I said to be taken as like that's the answer. What I'm saying is that's just part of the mechanism where we have the capacity to collectively experience, to have a change of heart. Example, Martin Luther King really gained traction and momentum after a Unitarian minister was murdered, and that enraged the country to really do the right thing in that moment. But so much momentum, so much activity. If that hadn't been on the press or in the media in some way or advertised, that wouldn't have been able to have the momentum that it needed to get the attention that it's getting. Same thing with what's happening with what people can collect through multimedia means to share back with each other. You know, ultimately our choice to have a change of heart or to be moved by something, it's happening. You know, and these are just the technologies that are available to us. And I think my point of view, or my sharing about like here's all these different points of view, they're really not getting us anywhere. And I think, Peter, I love what you said about the change of heart, because that's where we've seen those shifts where, you know, we've collectively said, hey, you know, no, Donald Trump's a dick. We don't want to back this kind of guy. You know, and there's these things happening where we're collectively building a voice and building a discernment and building a, you know, the Pope and the Dalai Lama right now are saying, hey, we need a, you know, movement of compassion. And again, I hear a correlation here between what you're saying and change of heart. You know, so I can be conscious and one with everything all I want, right, or think that I am, but I'm talking to you guys and we're talking at each other like we're not, right? So it's like, that's part of the fun in this experiment right now, is that we're clearly all having some sensitivity or some understanding of ourselves as this emergence as well, and participating in that. And we're struggling even through these technologies to really experience that. And I guess my question would be, you know, how do you individually experience that as true and share it with those? And do you have people that you connect with on that level? And what do you create as a result of that? You know, is it conversation that we're having now, or what is it that we're creating through that relationship interiorly with the people around us? And that's kind of what I'm beginning to explore a little bit, is like, what am I creating with those people that I really believe are not just intuitively connected, but intellectually have the capacity to realize what's trying to emerge through them. And what I would say is, you know, from a second tier perspective, we don't have structures that we've co-created in that space. And that's, for me, what I'm really kind of curious, like, what are we going to create? You know, someone mentioned co-ops and some other things that are emerging with more sensitivity, more awareness, blockchain, you know, Bitcoin, these mechanisms for cutting out the middleman, you know, exchanging value, valuing kindness, and actually putting capital, energy, and structures towards the things that we truly value from this consciousness. And right now, you know, a lot of the projects that I'm looking at or working on, when I present them to different people, they're like, oh, well, there's no market mechanism to support that. You know, that's the wall I keep running into. So it's like, you know, I'm finding different ways to find voice for this truth, and I keep getting told, hey, that's a fucking fabulous idea, but, you know, how do you make money at it? So I'm just curious how the rest of you are doing that, or how you're exploring that, or if you can give me some examples of people that have done that successfully that you feel like are operating in that space. Because I think those dots connecting for me are like what I'm looking to like channel my energy, attention, and time into. And that's what this book for me is pointing me towards, is like a deeper understanding that, like, you know, that's my purpose. Like, it's just to explore that and do that.
Can I add just one thing to that? I think one of the things that Gebser provides us with is a set of tools. It's a very simple setup, actually. It's just a handful of notions. And so they're easy to remember. And I think one of the things that's helpful is that when people say things, do things, while we're working in particular, we can better assess where they are actually coming from. Are they completely wrapped up in their rationality and mentality, or are they coming from a more mystical, mythical, or magical space, or direction, or whatever? And it helps then when you're trying to respond to them. I learned a long time ago that it's very easy to talk over people's heads, simply because you're using a vocabulary and a way of discussing that they're not familiar with, and so they get lost. But if you know where they are better than they know where they are, it can be very helpful in getting them to either express themselves better, otherwise, more effectively, or whatever. And so we can use it in the other way as an active tool, I think, interactions with others as well. That's all I wanted to say there.
I'd like to say just a couple of things, too. And one is that we're a bit over time, and I'm wanting to be flexible with that. We started late, and so I think we should start to orient toward closing the conversation. But I want to make a couple of brief remarks, and then let anyone else who wants to add a closing statement to do so. One is that with respect to what are we actually doing, how are we actually concretizing this and communicating this, whatever what we mean by this is one is I'm very suspicious of a kind of vanguardism, which presumes that you have something that other people don't have, that you have an answer, a structure, a technology. In certain cases, that may be true. You may have something specific to offer that you can package and market and sell, or make available through some other means. I don't know if that's actually the case with this. Like, I think that we are figuring it out, and part of the point of even having this conversation, this came up on our last Hangout, is that we need to keep talking about it just to sort of get to perhaps that place that Andrew was talking about, where we're not just in a frenzy of perspectives and in a sort of awkward fumbling with technology, and where we have some kind of fluency, perhaps, with being, with being beyond space and time, if that makes sense. That we'd have to unpack that a bit more. But so I hope that what we're doing here is useful in that process. I hope that we can maintain the spirit of inquiry and maintain sort of some leniency with where we're at, which I think is inherently a difficult and awkward place. Not just in this project and not just in this Hangout, but I think in our lives in general. What I'm seeing is everybody is kind of figuring it out. I mean, I don't know anybody who's really got it, knows what they're doing exactly. And even those who do, it tends to be because they're rooted in the other structure in some way. So they have the money, or they have the job, or they have whatever it is, and so that allows them to maybe do something that's more interesting and creative. But if you're trying to go for a real, total transformation, then ultimately those ties that you have to deficient structures need to dissolve, right? And we have to find new grounding for this new world that is wanting to manifest, that I think that we collectively, intuitively feel wants to manifest. And I don't think we're there yet, honestly. And I haven't, I know that there are plenty of examples in art. I think there are plenty of examples in particular people, particular figures. You mentioned the Pope, the Dalai Lama, others. I mean, it's in the air. And how exactly it takes shape, I think, is going to be up to what we do, how we relate to it. So, any closing comments before we end the Hangout?
Marco, you made me think of something, and I share your suspicion of vanguardism, and I think one of the things that Gebser's pointing to is that I have this image. The integral is not like at the top, right? Integral consciousness, it's almost as if it sinks back down to the spring, but is still able to see everything that has emerged through our history, hasn't destroyed it, hasn't erased it, but can see it at work, and can appreciate that intelligence that is present in everything and in everybody, that is just part of being alive. And I feel like that there's something about that recently for me which has been really big, which is not a return to source, return to origin, not as a way of denying the world, but as a way of staying close to the source where everything else is coming out of. And I feel like that's the quote-unquote next step. But even that next step, that idea of a next step, of there needing to be something else or further along, I feel, is a way of looking at it that is bound to all of our having been, raised and accultured in a predominantly mental and as Ed pointed out, a predominantly deficient mental culture. So that was more of a comment than I meant. I think it's that sense of being lit up, like a fountain lit up from below, and the structures of the fountain are there. They've built up in history, and now the light is on, or integral is like turning the light on, even though it's also always been on.
Yeah, Andrew and Marco, I'm right on with you, and particularly what Andrew just said about grounding that back into where we're at or where we're engaged and into these structures. Because what I find is that emotionally, like intellectually, I might be emerging into better understanding, but I might have an emotional attachment or something that kind of draws me back into like what I would consider less than the best ever responses in certain circumstances that are like more dense. But I also don't want to assume that the dissolving of ties to old structures is necessarily a given as well, because I found that whether the structure be my family or a monolithic organization that I work for, etc., that I'm finding more and more as I deepen my own practices spiritually that I can see and relate to these structures in more of a subtle energy sense. So it's like this sensitivity to collective And that shifts from context to context for me, where I can kind of like feel it as an intuitive relationship with whatever I'm giving my attention to moment to moment. And that affects my nervous system and my thinking and what I see as possible in each one of those, like relative to where my attention is. And so my nervous system, I feel like, is constantly rewiring, and the offering that I have to provide in the way that I can for that structure, be it this talk or my work or my family or when I walk out the door, like that's constantly reorganizing and reorienting. And so my sense of self has had to kind of dissolve into just a sense of being. It's a feeling. And I remember certain facts around myself, like, and who I am, but like there's a certain amount of showing up in a new way that if I were to describe it, might make me sound a little crazy, but that what's real for me is I'm more in relationship to everything that I'm experiencing in a sense of feeling in terms of how much energy and how much flow and how much complexity can be really held within my physical body moment to moment. And so my relationship to the world is changing in that the intellectual really only emerges when, like, in the moment, and then what I feel continuously is this a sense in my body of whether or not something's like really in flow. And it's kind of a strange way to describe existence, but for me that intuitive sense, and I don't know if it relates to what Peter said in terms of the change of heart, but it's a very painful place, but also a very beautiful place when I kind of release attachment to it. And I just wonder if anyone else has like a felt sense or relationship kinesthetically to the world that they experience these truths from as their day-to-day experience, moment-to-moment experience in these different structures.
Anyone?
Yes, just I'll try to keep it brief as well. I think one of the things that Gebser makes a lot of effort, and why he chose structures and mutations and not other vocabulary, was, it's as Andrew says, all of it is always there, but we're not consciously aware of it. We don't have it in a waking consciousness or more. And so a lot of this is submerged. A lot of this is deep within. And in going from one structure to another, he has two words in German that he uses to express what in the English translation comes across as supersede or supersession. And one of them is aufheben, which literally means to pick up. But what he's saying is, when we move from one structure to another, from magic to mythical or anyone, what was there? The magic doesn't go away. It's there. We don't have active, conscious, waking access to it. But what we need to do, I believe, to integrate is, as Andrew pointed out, go back and pick it up, because we have forgotten it, we have suppressed it, we have pushed it aside, and we need to reactivate it so that it is a continual, constant part of our now consciousness. What we're now doing in our everyday lives with the people that we meet every day, coming to terms with life on this planet as we find it. And I think that's one of the strengths that Gebser has, is that he's very insistent that these aren't levels. You know, he doesn't want to talk about them in spatial terms, higher or lower or whatnot. He talks about intensities.
Yes.
More than anything else, and it's in the intensity of our magic awareness, our getting the head and heart together, bringing them together, wherever that might be, up, down, it really doesn't matter, and that this whole idea is painful because we're not used to doing it. We have been very, very seriously acculturated to do things one way, and it's hard, I believe, to get into tune with those other ways of doing things that are very, very necessary. But I see a lot of I'm very encouraged by our discussion this evening, for example, because I'm a lot more motivated than I was before because, well, it was a long day for me until we got here, but I'm all excited now. So I'm ready to go. Next.
Marco, I just want to add one thing. Can I make it quick?
Please, yes.
Yeah, and I wasn't going to say anything, but when Ed said the word intensity, I couldn't hold back. Because I think the hardest part of the whole of Gebser is the first 4 chapters of the second part, where he really talks in some detail about the manifestation of this new consciousness. And that's when he really does use the word intensity a lot there. And I've been really struggling with that. At one point, I said, oh, intensity, oh, man, what does that mean? Because I've been called intense in my life many times, and it was not a compliment. Right? It kind of is a synonym for being uptight and overly serious. And so the last thing I want to do is be intense. So here's Gebser saying that you need to be intense. So what the heck does that mean? So I thought long and hard about it and tried to come up with some kind of an image. And I came up with an image that's going to resonate with you, Andrew, I think. I said, you know, intensity is like a dimmer switch. So if you have a dimmer switch, you can turn it up and you can turn it down, all right? And you get a brightness, you get more intensity, and I think that fits exactly with what you said, Andrew, about the light in the fountain. And it also, and Ed, in your spiral dynamics, I find that I go up and down all the time. I go up in the spiral and down in the spiral. I've been kind of in a depressed mood the last month, and I'm saying, geez, I'm talking about Gebser, and this last month I haven't been really like, oh man, you know? But like Ed just said, this whole conversation is just lighting me up, and I think the intensity is there. And I can't wait to meet my new students tomorrow, because that's where I shine the most, is in the classroom. So there you go. That's my thing.
Yeah. Before we close, one person I haven't heard from in a while is Wendy, and you're there with this grin, and that might be because your dog is doing something funny, or it may be that you it's suggestive of something that may want to be said, that you may want to say, but I could be wrong.
No, I can definitely close this up and kind of end on a lighter note. I have taken some notes as we've been talking, and I agree with a lot of what's been said. What I was smiling at is when I was taking my original graduate course in conscious evolution, I had an older dog with me who used to sit under my desk while I was writing my papers, and he watched me bang my head against the computer and against the table because I would get stuck and I couldn't figure something out. And I always equate my getting that degree with him being there. He has since passed away. I have a new dog. She's very patiently sitting here next to me in front of the fire listening to this conversation, which the previous dog didn't have a chance to do. He just saw me being frustrated, and I would talk to him about these concepts, and he would just look at me like, okay, Mom, that makes sense. Well, now she's actually listening this time, and she's looking at me like, yeah, okay, Mom, this makes sense. So I think, if we can get out of our own way, I mean, if the animals can figure it out and it makes sense to them, then I think we're in a good spot. We can do this too.
Okay, cool. That's funny. The intensity bit, just to close, I mean, I've been grappling a little bit with our reading schedule because we want to get through this book. We want to read through it in a pretty short amount of time, and there's an intensity, I think, that's called for to do that. I don't think, like I said at the beginning of the call, I don't think that this period of time can at all exhaust the discussion, or can certainly not exhaust what may want to emerge out of this reading. But as I was feeling it, and I think intensity is a matter of feeling, it's not just sort of an abstraction. It's something you feel in your body that hurts, that can hurt, could be exhilarating, could be ecstatic, but it's something that's felt, and it's something that is often felt in the heart. So we talk about a change of heart, that there's some transformation, I think, that occurs there as well, and I think that keeping a certain level of intensity and going into that intensity may be part of the practice here, right? It may be part of what we need to do to get to wherever we need to get through this group that is coalescing here. So for anybody who's watching this and is not part of the conversation that this amongst us. I kind of want to give a pep talk or something and say, just go with it. Like, take it seriously. Like, go into it for this time at least. Go into the intensity. It's hard. It's not. It's a hard text, but I'm finding that if I bring myself to it, if I bring as much a wakeful presence, another phrase that Gebser uses, to it, that there's a transmutational process that seems to be initiated, and I like where it's going, and I like that you all gravitated towards this, and I'm very curious to see where it will go. So thank you.
Thank you, Marco.
All right.
Thank you, Marco.
All right. Let's wrap it up.
Hi, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
All right. Have a good one.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye now.